Hi, my name's Sam Mickelson, founder of True Worth. We're a talent solutions business, so it's all about people. And that's why we created a podcast channel. We wanted to bring together members of our True Worth collective, our clients, candidates, generally anybody in tech that wants to come and talk about their experience as a person, products, platforms or projects that they've been involved with. So you can find us on all of the normal podcast channels and platforms. Links to all of our socials are in the description. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much and enjoy the episode.
Right. Are you ready for this?
I am.
Listen, thanks for joining me. I really do appreciate it. And I know that everyone's got such busy lives these days. So when anyone takes the time to come and talk to me and have this discussion, especially on a podcast, because it feels like everybody's doing them at the moment. I really appreciate it. But what I wanted to just sort of pick you up on, first of all, was that you used to be a DJ.
I think technically I still am. I have done radio since 1997, and technically that makes me a DJ. Put me in front of a couple of turntables at a wedding. I wouldn't know where to start. But put me behind the mixing deck in a radio studio. I see myself as a presenter more than a DJ, to be fair.
Well, I think I told you, didn't I? When I was a kid, I had this sort of, little tape recorder, and I used to pretend to record radio things for myself as a kid. So, now doing a podcast, it feels like all my childhood dreams are coming true, and I can learn from the master, maybe.
Stealing from the thieves. Don't steal all my good ideas. I think the thing for me as a presenter more than a DJ is I love my music. But for me, the radio comes alive when you've got guests, which I think is the reason why there's a nice segue into podcast, because it is two-way. There's nothing worse than shouting into an empty room.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want this to be very conversational and sort of we'll go with the flow, but I want to come from a layperson's point of view on your, expertise. And, I know we've spoken before and we've had a chat, but I've also been on your LinkedIn profile and done a bit of stalking. You call yourself an experienced digital and e-commerce project manager and digital e-commerce skills trainer. 20 years experience. Now, I think that's more than 25 actually, isn't it? But I'll let you off on that one. Hands-on experience, all aspects of the digital life cycle, strategy, discovery, project, product management, delivery, testing and training. And you're also very passionate about mental health and work-life balance and well-being. And I think we're going to talk about that today, aren't we? We're going to touch on that, but we're going to cover a few things today, including the challenges that, digital agencies face these days when they're delivering projects for clients. You're also going to talk about how agencies can avoid certain pitfalls that kind of go hand in hand with running an agency, whether it be challenging clients or projects. We're going to be talking about embracing the new norm, working remotely, fluid market, employees and how that's changing, safeguarding and well-being of those employees as well. And we'll also look at some of the big boys, maybe what they're getting right, but also perhaps where they can improve, and how small and more agile companies and agencies can actually win business and retain business. And obviously we're going to talk about how the landscape's changed in your 25 years of being in the industry. So do you want to just sort of start by just giving, for people who don't know you, Craig, giving people a bit of an overview of your background and where you've come from, if that's okay, maybe, and include the hospital DJing. Feel free.
Well, the hospital DJing bit was where it all started back in 97, which actually when I'd just come back from London. So I did an engineering degree, and in the mid-90s, went back to college in London to do a print and publishing diploma with the London College of Printing. So it was kind of I enjoyed the engineering, but I wasn't a real pure science, pure engineer. There was still a little bit of creativity trying to come out. So I liked the fact that the print and publishing gave me that creative outlet as well. But when I came back up to the north, I ended up working for Time Computers, who at that point, they were huge. They were one of the really early mass market producers of affordable home desktop PCs.
Yeah.
Up there with Tiny, Evesham. This was just when Dell were in the very, very early days. And obviously 97, 98, the internet was an idea. Email was patchy. People were just starting to wake up to this thing they'd heard about called the internet. It was still very much in the academic realms. And when I was working at Time Computers, I realized really quickly that we were selling in Windows 98 PCs, and Windows 98 was flaky at best.
Yeah.
So the chances of a computer landing on somebody's desk on Christmas Day working and them knowing what to do with it was slim to none. And I just put an advert in the paper in the Burnley Express for to help people set up their new Christmas PC and actually show them what to do with it. I had a deal with a local provider to get people pence per minute dial up to the internet. So it was really early days, and I think that's where for me, everything I've ever done has been about training and empowerment and learning. So right from those very early days, I mean, it was by luck more than anything else, by chance, that I started training people in those really early days. I learned the basics of HTML and CSS and a bit of Visual Basic, which did me no good stead whatsoever, because that was dying out at the time. But 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And I started training, and very quickly people were asking me to build their websites. I mean, the first big gig I ever got was training Co-op. They'd spent millions on a piece of software called Oracle Portal Builder, which nobody knew how to use. So we set up a training suite for them in Altrincham and trained them for 6 months on these. But then obviously the agency took off. I ran an agency for 10 years. We focused very much on, I mean, it was the really early days of e-commerce. So we were starting before e-commerce was even a thing. But we were in the early days of building database-driven websites, giving people the ability to update their own website, which is pretty unique in those days. Web design companies did not like handing control of updates and editing to their customers. But we just thought, well, why not? Why are we looking at it from what we can get out of it? Customers want to maintain and manage their own website, so we gave them the tools to do it. And that was up until 2010. I sold my business in 2010 to a print publishing company. We created a digital arm of that print publishing company. The company was called 10Help. We created 10Help Digital, gave them all the new, all the tools that they needed to push the business on and to embrace digital. They had all this content that wasn't indexed, so they kind of repurposed it. So we gave them kind of a business model. And then since that, I've done a mix of training, consultancy, a lot of digital project management, contract work, worked on CMSs, CRM systems. Obviously now e-commerce is kind of growing up a little bit, but for me, I've always gone back to that training background. I'd much rather give somebody the skills, empower them, and let them learn themselves than just do things for people. So there's always an element of that. I always enjoy when there's an element of training or teaching or learning in a role.
And that's a bit like, today's project manager or change manager, that's kind of this hybrid person really between project management, business analysis and change. I guess the stuff that you learn as a trainer, that stood you in good stead for the future without you even realizing it, maybe.
Well, it has. I mean, there is still, I mean, I'll come back to the bit about project management, but there is still a belief in digital that if you want to learn a new skill, you have to learn it yourself.
Yeah.
We don't tend to have, agencies don't tend to have the capacity to teach people new things. And genuinely, I've worked in agencies where the mindset has been, if you want a pay rise, learn a new skill and then go and get a job somewhere else. because pay rises in digital aren't a thing. So there is a belief with digital that people teach themselves. But I think there is still a reluctance for businesses outside of agencies to learn things themselves. So then there's a bit of a gap then of them wanting digital solutions, digital products. They don't really get it. They don't really understand it. So to me, if I was in a business point of view, if coming from the business point of view, and I was going to an agency, I'd want to feel comfortable that I know what I'm talking about. So I'm having a conversation as an equal with them.
Yes.
And that's genuinely refreshing. And what I enjoy is when you're doing training, there is a slight shift in people's mindset. They are coming to you wanting to learn. So their minds are open. They're much more receptive to being told things. And that's very difficult when you're in an agency dealing with a customer, to encourage them to learn. So I think that's where the training bit comes in, because people are coming with the mindset of they want to learn, they want to listen.
And okay, so if clients want to learn and they want to listen, then what are the, if that's one challenge they've got to overcome, what are the other sort of unique challenges do you think then that agencies these days are facing when they're delivering products and projects?
I think for me, 10, 15 years ago, agencies, employers were in control. Now it's the employees that drive the big cars. There is a big change in, I think once upon a time, businesses were always focused on chasing clients. Now I think it's on chasing staff. I mean, you'll know, coming from a recruitment background, now it's really important to keep all of the staff that you've got.
Yeah.
So I am seeing a slight change in more of a value of the staff they've currently got, a little bit more training, better well-being in agencies. But I think the biggest struggle for agencies is still keeping hold of their staff. I think a lot of agencies still are running to the bottom. They're still buying clients. There's still a mindset that, we have to have all of the clients. We can't, they're buying work by being incredibly cheap, really undercutting everybody else, not appreciating that once they've got that client, they're going to make some profit from it. I've seen so many agencies that have this idea that more clients are better. I think that's a big challenge. For me, it's having the mindset that it's the quality of the clients you have, not the quantity. But I think that's now sort of changing. I think the keeping hold of what you've currently got and realizing that there's no point constantly chasing new clients, constantly chasing new staff. So there's more of a value of kind of what you've currently got. I think that's the biggest challenge. Keeping up to date with technology is now a lot easier. They should be able to. There's a lot easier access to learning new skills. So I think that's been sorted out. Go back 15, 20 years ago, everybody was just trying to see what worked. A lot of stuff didn't work, a lot of competing frameworks, things just didn't. I mean, I remember the early days of Magento. It was a terrible piece of software. It just didn't work. But you had to kind of find that out. So I think there's probably that has improved. But I still think there's an awful lot of agencies that chase work that has no real value.
It's interesting what you said about the retaining of people within the digital agency world. And I have seen that in the recruitment world as well. But for a long time, it always felt like to me that it was kind of accepted that people moved around different agencies. There was never any real, it was almost like a given thing. Well, I've been here 2 years. This other big media agency or ad agency have headhunted me to go and head up their digital, offering. I'm going to go there. I'm going to take all my clients with me. And it feels like that sort of Mad Men culture has continued, especially in London. But do you think that's changed now? Is there more realization that there is value in keeping people, or is the culture just changing?
It's interesting you mentioned the Mad Men, and it's a good analogy. I mean, I remember working in agencies. I mean, you'd go out and you say, I wonder where so-and-so went. Oh, they went to this
Yeah.
agency. And you know that they'll go to that agency, they'll go to another one, they'll go to another one. In 3 years' time, they'll come back to the same agency. And there is
Yeah.
that merry-go-round. But that's really difficult to maintain and manage, because every time somebody goes, you're losing all that knowledge, you're losing the relationship that person had with the client, you're losing their skills. They're an important part of the team. They've got to be replaced. You've got to train somebody up. You've got to hope you get the right person that's got the right fit for the agency. It's very short term, but it was accepted. It doesn't really matter. People will spend a year. I still think it's unrealistic to expect somebody to spend 3, 4, 5 years in a business. But actually, my partner's an HR consultant, and she was saying that, you know, businesses now have got to accept that if they can get 2 good years out of somebody, that's pretty good. People will naturally move on. But there's absolutely no point in just having a merry-go-round of people going round and round and round. It doesn't benefit the client or the business or the employees. Nobody wins in that situation.
And then, so we're talking about people maybe taking clients and then taking projects with them. How does an agency avoid those pitfalls then? How do they, you know, when it comes to running a digital agency and handling multiple clients when they first start, what are the pitfalls and how do they avoid them?
It's impossible not to believe. I mean, when I joined 10 Alps, so we had a small agency. There were never any more than 6 or 7 of us at a maximum. When I joined 10 Alps, we joined a huge business, and pretty quickly, a lot of my clients that come with me left because they liked the small agency. They liked being able to ring me, get a direct response. They didn't like the changing culture that came with me being part of this huge conglomerate. I had to accept that. The people that, you know, I'd had clients for 8, 9, 10 years, and they were personal friends of mine. So in a way, when I moved to this big conglomerate and I was no longer a big fish in a small pond, they kind of lost that. It's inevitable. You are going to have people who leave with their clients. You've just got to accept that, but you've got to hope that you build a good enough relationship so the value is in the whole team, never in one individual. It's unlikely a developer would take a client with them. It tends to be the more senior people when you're going to get management buyouts or splits or people set up on their own. But, you know, we're all grown-ups. These things happen. I think you've just got to plan for it, accept it. I mean, I remember back in the early 2000s, you know, we won clients from other agencies, and some of them could be really petty about it. And if somebody came to me and said, look, Ray, thank you very much. You've done a great job, but we're going somewhere else. What's the point in leaving with a real smell? You might as well, just because invariably they will come back. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, you can go to that other agency. They're not going to do what you want because it's not possible. It's not me that's just saying that. And they will come back. And obviously you don't want to burn your bridges. I think it's just about being grown up and accepting that is the way that it works.
Sounds like it's quite a pragmatic way of looking at it, and knowing that there's a bigger picture, and there's in the long run, they do come back potentially. Have you seen that happen to you in the past then?
It's happened to me. I mean, I remember one particular company who was a recruitment consultant, and he went to an agency run by a friend of mine, and I rang the guy and said, just to let you know, Richard XXX is coming your way. It was a challenge. He came back because he didn't get what he wanted. And I think, you know, there's that grass is always greener. So yeah, I've seen it happen, but I think with age and experience comes the realization that Manchester is a big city, but it's still quite a small pool. Yeah, you can't leave a smell somewhere and it not get noticed. People will talk about, and if a client leaves, there's absolutely no point in ending that friendship, because they may well come back. And invariably, if you upset somebody, chances are you'll be working with them in 2 years' time. And I've had that as well. So.
What about then moving on to, we're talking a little bit about retaining staff then, people moving from one agency to another. How much of the recent movement in agency staff going from one place to another, and we're talking about either account managers, account directors, digital project managers, etc., going from, you know, digital agency A to digital agency B in Manchester, say, how much of that is down to those companies not embracing new ways of working, do you think?
Well, I am now a firm believer. I mean, I did a talk to the BBC a few weeks ago, and my opening line was in 1996, I think it was. I was selling ISDN telephone systems with video conferencing and telling everybody, believing it to be true, that within 5 years we would have we would have done away with face-to-face meetings, all using video conferencing. 20 years later, in a pandemic, we've finally now accepted that we can still work remotely. We can work with more flexibility. We can do video conferencing. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it is the be all and end all. I still think there is definitely a place for face-to-face contact. But in a way, the belief by a lot of employers that if employees weren't sat there in the office, they weren't working, has been proven not to be true. People can still be trusted. People are still productive. And that couple of hours of time in the morning and evening, going backwards and forwards to the office, can be used for keeping on top of your health and well-being and making you a more productive, happier and rounded and more valued employer. So I think the ones that value that, and sadly it is slightly the slightly older generation that running businesses that haven't really embraced that. Like I say, my partner's an HR consultant. She's working with a very traditional conservative company at the moment, and they're really anti-remote working. But I think what they're going to have to accept is if they don't embrace it, their employees will go to somewhere that does. So, like I said, it's now a shift, and you hear all these terms like quiet quitting, which, if you know, it's this idea that people are reluctant to really push the extra hours and the extra effort because they need to know there's an immediate value to that. I don't really agree with the quiet quitting. I think if you want to just do that, it's a bit of a work to rule. And I think I've always said I'm happy that I work some extra hours if you kind of get them back, and if it's for the greater good. But again, employees ought not to take that for granted. And I think all of these things, if you don't keep hold of the staff and you aren't flexible and you don't realize that there is this power shift now to employees, you will lose them, and it will become increasingly more difficult. And I've read some great reports over the last few weeks about CEOs in America talking about trying to introduce hybrid working. In some industries it's working, and some industries it's not. And in digital, there is very little real reason why people have to be sat at a desk in an office.
Yeah. I mean, I've experienced it myself, over the last 2 or 3 years, that interviews are now held over Teams or Zoom. And as long as a stand-up's done in the morning and people are there and they are delivering what they need, from a digital or tech or data point of view, it's all outcome based. So as long as you're delivering on your outcomes that's been agreed, there shouldn't really be a problem. I think that there is value in people getting together and collaborating and being in a place, but I think the place of work has changed. It's more now about kind of networking, socializing with your peers. Collaborating, I think, is important. I think it's important to get people together. I mean, we've talked about this with the True Worth Collective about getting people together, not just talking online. But yeah, you're right, absolutely. And I think the companies that have got that flexible attitude to where people work, they're the ones that are going to win the war on, tech or digital talent in the future. Absolutely.
Totally. I don't think we dispense with face-to-face altogether, because we both talked about wanting to start networking groups. Since Christmas, I've made much more of an effort to actually go out and meet people. But that's outside the office. That's learning new skills, meeting new people. I mean, one of the reports I was reading was the CEO of Very Group, who was talking about how difficult it is to onboard people remotely because they never get an exposure to their colleagues. And I've had it, and I understand how difficult it is when you're working with somebody that you've never met. The last couple of contracts I've done, One, I was working with people in Colorado and in Italy, and then the last one, people were all over the world, and I met very few of them. And it does make it difficult to form those relationships, to form those levels of trust. So I think what the CEO of Very was saying is that when they onboard people, there is an acceptance that they're going to have people in the office for a certain amount of time, get them used to technology, get them used to the culture of the business, introduce them to the people that they're working with, go and have those water cooler moments, go to the pub in an evening and form those personal relationships, build the trust, build the empathy. Then by all means, go and work from home. But you've had that initial grounding, and I think that is really important too.
That's a really interesting forward thinking way of doing it, isn't it? Giving them a kind of 3 months grounding in the business, building up that trust both ways, and then allowing people that extra flexibility. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I read something about the number of businesses that are trying to put in place tracking software and talk about an absolute own goal. I mean, the negative PR from these businesses that just haven't trusted their staff and have tried to put on tracking software and productivity software and trying to work out it's an appalling thing. I think we've got to appreciate that whether it's in a business or a business to a client, these relationships are grown-up relationships, just as personal relationships are. And if you have a relationship where there isn't mutual trust, it ain't going to work. And I think that's just as important with employees as it is with personal relationships. And again, it's the same with clients. I mean, I talked about agencies chasing clients and allowing clients to be too dictatorial. I've worked in agencies where they're terrified of the client and saying no to the client. And I've had to sit there and say, no is an incredibly powerful word, because you wouldn't have that one-sided level of an unequal amount of respect in a personal relationship. You'd say that's a toxic relationship. So why do we allow that with clients? Why are we not, as a sector, comfortable saying to clients no?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think it's that boundary thing, isn't it? It's that ability to set some boundaries with your client, with your staff. How you, as an owner, you've got to put those boundaries in place, because otherwise you'd be overrun. I know I find I have that challenge literally every day. And you're right. It's very hard to say no to a client. It's like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, when do you want it by? But you're right. You need to look after yourself there, don't you? And that brings me on to, so when you're an owner of any sort of digital business and you've got people working remotely for you, how do you look after their well-being? How do you make sure and monitor, okay, let's not monitor their work, but how do you monitor how they feel and what's happening with them, and are they happy? Because that leads right into retaining those people, doesn't it? And I'm sure your partner will have experienced this herself.
It's what I was talking to the BBC about a few weeks ago. So I think the acceptance that working remotely, engaging with people remotely is different. It's not going to be the same. It is going to be different. There are lots of tools out there, and actually the last place where I was contracting, they brought a tool in which allowed people to say on a scale of 1 to 10 how well they felt that day, which was okay, but it doesn't get to what's underneath. And I think that's when there's this personal connection that we still need. So I've often said, when you have large meetings, you lose that personal contact. When people start turning their cameras off, you lose that ability to read their body language. It's a lot easier to read somebody. We all know that what you say and what you're telling me from your body language is very different. And when you lose that, so I think making regular personal connections. I've often said, don't make every meeting a work meeting. Have personal meetings. Have meetings where there is no agenda. You're not talking about work, because you would do that anyway. If you're working in an office, you have your lunch time. Yeah. Where if somebody rocks up and starts talking about work, everybody moves to the other end of the table. You go to the pub at night, and I know the temptation is to talk about the boss and talk about the work, but invariably when you have these after work events, that starts to tail off and people start talking about their own kind of personal things. So I think having that is really important to make sure that meetings are small, that you can see people's body language, you engage with people in non-work activities, have a bit of fun. I in the last place where I was working, I was helping with the training, because the girl that was delivering the training over Teams had never done any non-face-to-face training. And I kept saying, you know, I kind of in the chat, kind of saying to her, you need to tell so-and-so to turn the camera on. You need to get them engaged. They haven't answered anything. There's all these little tips and tricks that, I mean, I started training using Zoom a long time before the pandemic. So I'd learned the tricks and the tips of making sure you engage people, looking to see when the last time somebody engaged was somebody to turn their camera off. It's awkward, but you call them out. So you ask a question, you give it specific to that person. They might not like it at first because they may be doing something else, but it's just making sure that everybody's bought in.
Is it worth kind of having a conversation with that person directly, first of all, though, to kind of see if there's any issues or challenges? Because not everybody feels comfortable talking on Teams. I think it's, for a lot of people, seeing themselves talking away kind of fills them with a bit of dread. So how do you get without putting them on the spot and making them feel even more uncomfortable, is there a better way of engaging with them?
Well, what I've liked is when we've done meetings where we have little breakout groups. So you have, if particularly if you've got a large group of people, very difficult to do that one-to-one. And you're right, what I'll tend to do is message somebody and say, can you just put your camera on? And if you don't respond, then you've got to get a little bit more heavy on them and kind of call them out. But you do that in a training room anyway. So why shouldn't you do that online? I mean, I've done face-to-face training where but you can see then somebody's body language. They're not engaged. They've got the phone out. They're not focusing. So you've got to watch for that, because that's part of the skill of training, is making sure that people don't switch off, because not everything that you're talking about is going to be relevant to every single person. So you've got to kind of watch them switching off. And I don't think that's any different when you're doing online, but I do like the idea of breakout groups. I've used things like Miro boards to get people engaged. So when you do a SWOT analysis, don't just, I'd actually give them the opportunity to get onto the Miro board and move things around. So to actually add things to the 4 quadrants of a SWOT analysis, because it gives them something to do rather than just listening. And my own personal thing is, meetings should never be longer than an hour. If you're going over an hour, you've got to accept that your audience is switched off. We don't have the attention span for that. But I've been in meetings where that 75% of the people haven't talked at all in 2 hours. That's not productive. That's not productive at all. No. So breakout groups, using tools, things like kind of Miro boards, getting people to actually start to type things in and discuss it. And the smaller groups, then people are more engaged.
And I guess at the start of a training session, you have those, and any sort of presentation or event these days, you have like a moment where the presenter talks about, right, okay, so exits are over here. If you hear a fire alarm, we're all going to go that way. And they set expectations, don't they? And I guess you do the same in a training session. You kind of go, right, this is what my expectations are. I'm going to do this. I'm going to expect some feedback. So should that be the way, when you talk about agendas for meetings, when you are talking about business, should you be just setting that expectation in the same way that you would do with a live event then?
I think you should be. That there is nothing, I called it, when I did my talk, I called it meeting hygiene. And there are lots of things you can do. And one of the things I always say, if you're doing a longer training, so meetings, keep them to less than an hour. There's no reason to have any more than maybe half a dozen people in a meeting for more than an hour, because that's a day's worth of man time lost. If you've got more than 5 or 6 people in a meeting, it goes on for more than an hour, you've lost your focus. You're not targeting and focusing enough in that meeting. And I think you've got to, that meeting hygiene idea is to make it a better environment for the people that are in there. One of the things I always do, whether it's face-to-face or on Zoom, is give people, if you're doing a training session that's longer than an hour, give people 5 or 10 minutes off, because I know for a fact, if they get an awkward or an uncomfortable email in the middle of that meeting from their boss, their mind is gone. They're focusing on all of the subconscious stuff. What does my boss think? What does he mean that? What do I need to go back and say? Am I in trouble? What does it? And they lose their focus. So I always say, after a 45, 50 minutes, have a break, call it a comfort break, but you know that people are going to go away and start answering the kind of urgent emails. You've got to accept that. You do it in a face-to-face meeting, so why not do it in an online meeting as well? And it's those little bits of courtesy to your audience that mean your audience has a little bit of respect for you, because you know that they're a part of the meeting as well. They're not just there to listen to you preach.
Yeah. And I think that comes across massively from everything you've said there. It's all about empowering people and considering them, but also having an expectation of them to take part. I'm going to change the subject slightly. We're going to, it's not a great segue, but we're going to segue anyway. We did talk a little bit about how when you went from owning your own business to then it being kind of bought and you being part of all of a sudden a bigger conglomerate, as you described it, things changed. And I think that we've both talked a little bit about how, bigger companies, whether they be recruitment companies, consultancies, software businesses, as businesses scale and get bigger and bigger, it's harder and harder to manage. I mean, we've seen Twitter losing 75% of their staff and they're still going. How do smaller, agile digital agencies learn from maybe the mistakes that the bigger companies make, in your opinion?
I think they all make the same mistakes. They just make them on a grander scale. I mean, you've talked about Twitter losing all of their staff. I mean,
sorry, not losing, got rid of.
Well,
yeah. And some,
absolutely, yeah.
They haven't quitted, have they? They have literally quitted.
They quite noisily quitted in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I think the mistakes are the same. They're just on a different scale. I think when you've got a smaller business, my biggest concern with us was having the right mindset and making sure that when people joined, and I was actually talking to somebody about this the other day, we had a really good ethic. We worked hard. I created time for them to learn things. So we had a little bit of it was something I learned from Google when Google had Google Labs, the idea that Friday afternoons, right, client work's out the way now. You've got a few hours, guys, to learn new skills. And that was great. And they really enjoyed that. And actually, we had a couple of little spin-off businesses. We created our own email marketing platform. We created our own survey tool, way before things like kind of MailChimp and SurveyMonkey and the like. But the guys learned those skills.
Yeah.
Every couple of weeks, I'd just randomly say, right, Friday afternoon, we're going to go to Pizza Hut, mash out. And we kept it like that. We brought one person in and he pushed the boundaries of what I thought was acceptable. I had a fairly relaxed dress code, but he'd walk around in shorts and white socks and no shoes. And it started to change things because people were like, oh, hang on a minute, well, he's getting away with that. Very untidy. And it was really funny. I'd always talk to them very much as adults. And I kept asking them to just be tidy, to not leave coffee stains on the walls because I've just painted them and things like that. And he didn't listen. So I had to do the probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done, which is actually literally right. I wrote a letter and printed it out, put it on the desks. And the guys that knew me knew that was like the final straw for me. This guy then went absolutely nuts about that. He'd never been spoken to in that way. And I've tried all the grown up ways. He hand wrote his resignation letter in pencil and left it on my desk. But that was it really changed the dynamic. So when you grow your business, it's really important that you get people in that don't change that dynamic. When I joined 10 Alps, they were very sales focused. The sales guys were gods. They got away with all sorts. Lying was just part of it's part of the way they worked. They were making up stats, it was a really different thing. And I had to keep, in a way, almost physically keep our guys separate to those guys because I didn't want the kind of, I was trying to create in that department the feel of a startup, the feel of an agency. We were agile, we could work quickly, we had lots of ideas, we tried things out. If things didn't work or if we made a mistake, we covered each other's backs. We didn't wash our dirty linen in public. If somebody made a mistake, you accepted it. So when we had this huge business, when we tried to scale with 10 Alps, they had an HR person who wanted to be involved in everything, and I couldn't make decisions myself. I had to go through HR. We lost the agility, we lost the personal touch. So I think when you're growing your business, and a lot of agencies just want to grow their businesses. And I just like, don't be careful what you wish for, guys. Bigger agencies mean bigger problems. And I think for me, a lot of agencies lose the fact that, you can be more profitable without having to really scale. But if you are going to scale, you have to have in mind what you want to scale to. Because like I said, it's not just different problems, it's the same problems on a bigger scale. And that will really crush the reason why you started a business. As a business owner, that will be terrible. You brought your child into the world and you really want to keep them going in the same direction.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that. I think recruitment is a kind of similar situation. I think the accepted way for an owner of a recruitment business is to achieve more profit. It's about growing that headcount, but I think sometimes you forget actually that you can generate additional revenue or better margins by maybe providing a better service and charging more for it, maybe, without having to scale and throw people at the problem. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, scaling bigger businesses just inevitably mean bigger problems. And I look back now, we didn't value ourselves when I had my own agency. We didn't value ourselves anywhere near enough. We should have been charging twice as much. But I learned that from experience when I started seeing what other bigger, more grown-up agencies were charging.
Yeah.
And I remember ringing my old kind of right-hand man. He was kind of the technical architect of the business. And I said, Michael, we should have been charging twice as much, because I've seen what the bigger agencies in Manchester are charging. They're charging twice as much, but they're not delivering twice as much value. So I think there's this belief that small can't be great, but actually it can. And I like small, agile businesses that can flex very quickly. They can try new things. But you've got to have the mindset of that. So if you're scaling your business, I think you've got to be really careful what you wish for, because bigger companies, bigger problems.
Got it. And when you look back then over the last 25 years, I'm going to ask you how the landscape has changed. But before I do that, what would you say to yourself now, to the young Craig first getting into the industry? Now that you know what you know, what one bit of advice would you give Craig 25 years ago then?
I think for me, we created some great products in 2006, 7, 8. I remember after a few years being a little bit losing clients, winning clients. It's a bit of a merry-go-round. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who started his agency at exactly the same time as me. He's still doing it. He accepts that he's bored, his words. And I think I would have looked back and said we should have stopped being an agency in 2007 or 8 and chosen. We built our own email marketing platform called Thingimail. We built a survey tool called Usensio. Usensio was being used all over the world, but we were just basically running it at cost and we didn't make any money out of it. We should have. I look back now and think it's a couple of missed opportunities there. In my bones, I knew that running an agency wasn't what I wanted to do. I'm a products guy. We should have. I think I would say, take Craig to one side, a little tap on the shoulder, and say, pick one of those and run with it. Because Thingimail at the time for an email marketing platform was really clever. We were doing some really good stuff, but we didn't stick at it. And actually, it's one of the problems when we joined 10 Alps. They didn't want us working on our own kind of pet projects. But that's what I would say is that we should have picked one of those two and flex from being an agency into being a digital business.
That's interesting, isn't it? So like maybe a SaaS product potentially there.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I say, I look back now at particularly things like MailChimp. We were ahead in those days. We were ahead of MailChimp. We allowed people to build their own emails. We'd started work on a kind of a WYSIWYG editor for people to build their own template.
Yeah,
that was our idea before things like MailChimp came up with the idea. So we should have kind of stuck to that.
Hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
It's also rather frustrating, isn't it?
I know how you feel. Don't worry. Okay, Craig. Well, and then, all right, talking about the last 25 years, can you give me a few things where you think or feel that the landscape's changed in those last 25 years? How has it changed, and what are your predictions for the next 5-10 years maybe?
I think the prediction is an interesting one. What I've seen change, obviously, when I started in 98, 99, desktop PCs, the web was an idea, wasn't really there. Obviously, I've seen the rise of e-commerce from the very, very early days of really simple e-commerce sites now to fully e-commerce businesses. I think data is the big thing now. I think back in those days, there wasn't a real value other than your email marketing list. I think now the value is in the data and the insights. There is obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, there are a lot of businesses now that are collecting all this data. It's a huge value to know not just what your customer's email address is, but their behaviors, their actions, their emotions, their triggers. I think that's changed. Data now is really the new currency, and obviously the likes of Facebook, Instagram, they're the big ones that monetize that. I think we've got slightly more mature technologies. Back in those days, there was still an assumption that you started a lot of things from scratch. You learned very basic things like, you learn Visual Basic, HTML. So there's a lot of frameworks now. I think development is a lot quicker. You start with a foundation and build on it. But it's something I was always banging on about in the late 2000s was there's very rarely a good business case to start from scratch. You go out, you find the foundation. You don't create your own Lego blocks. You go and get them and you build something from it. So I think that has changed. Like I say, we've gone now from the clients being the valuable thing to the employees being a big thing. I think there is obviously now, I mean, when I started, there was no social media. So now, reputational damage, PR, all of those kind of things are really, really important. The way that we market things has changed. Obviously, my day, and I remember teaching SEO in the really early days, 2002-3. I was teaching people how to do ethical SEO because there was a lot of the black hat SEO.
Yeah,
that's gone to a certain extent now. It's all about the social channels. You are selling through social channels. I remember when Google launched pay-per-click, and now you're looking at 10, 20, 30 pounds a click. It's incredibly expensive. And I worked at an e-commerce business that spent £500,000 a month on PPC. So you've got to look at for £500,000 that you would give to Google for PPC. What could you do to sell in a social way? Yeah. Selling peer-to-peer and word of mouth before it was word of digital ones and zeros was always the best way. Our best leads were always recommends. Yeah. So I think we've kind of gone back a little bit now. So social is a peer recommendation engine, if you think about it. So I think that is only going to get more and more important. I mean, we've seen the rise of influencers. They're nothing other than great networkers.
Yeah.
And they're realizing, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think some of them do take it to excess and they get a bad name, but they're very skilled at what they do, and fair play to them.
Yeah. And I can't finish a podcast or even have a podcast at the moment and not mention AI and chat GPT. Surely that's going to disrupt digital agencies, like it's going to disrupt every single industry. How do you think that's going to play a part then?
Well, in the first place, if it does disrupt, great, because you look at the likes of the Googles and going right back to the start, your Yahoos and your MSNs, and then your Facebooks and your Twitter. They've all been disruptive, and we've learned and we've grown from it. So I still think AI is an interesting concept, looking for an interesting problem to solve. I don't really understand where the value is in asking ChatGPT to write a blog post for you. There's all this concern about whether students are going to cheat from it. It will have a place, and maybe what it does is replace repetitive low value content generation. But I don't think it's going to replace the human ability to understand sentiment, to read people's body language, to write with emotion and feeling. that's never going to take off. But it may replace a lot of the menial tasks. I think what we'll find is, as it matures, and I've looked at AI, and I've looked at chatbots, and I did some work last year where the company was looking at whether to replace certain things with chatbots. They have a place, but they're still a long way off. People still know when they're talking to a chatbot and not talking to a real human. And I don't know whether we'll ever capture that ability to completely for someone not to know that they're talking to a piece of AI, but there will be a place for it. So I think it will maybe write some of the content that is mundane, that isn't that high value, but I don't think it will replace high value human to human content.
It feels very much like, to me at least, that 2012 or 2010, 2011, 2012 was always like the year of the mobile. And when I went to a lot of agency events where people were talking about marketing and advertising, everybody was banging on about, well, this year's going to be the year of mobile. And it didn't really become the year of mobile until you had 4G. 4G changed the game. The technology changed the game in the same way that the jump from dial-up to proper broadband changed the game. Boo.com were a fabulous product, but they just weren't ready. The technology wasn't ready. Mobile, the same. Everyone was creating mobile applications, but not really knowing why or what. Now people know that it's taken 5-10 years, hasn't it, to kind of go, right, now I know what I need to do in an app for it to be a proper app and how to get maximum value from it. It feels the same thing with machine learning and AI, that people have been talking about it for so long, and it's only now with this all of a sudden ChatGPT being in everyone's faces, people go, oh right, so that's what machine, to people, the layperson is like, oh right, okay, well I still don't get it, but now I see what it actually is and what it can do because I can play with it. I think you're right. It's going to take a bit of time, isn't it? And it's going to a lot of talk about curating it and making it a thing, and it's what you can then build from it. Am I rambling there, or
no? I think you're right. I think with things like AI, we give it the things to do to allow us to put a little bit more humanity into things that they can't. And I think at the moment it's a new technology. Like I said, I think there's a bit of kind of supply, trying to work out what the demand is for it. But that's great. We will test it. We'll work out what works and what doesn't work. We'll find a place for it, like we have done over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I think every time there's something new, as humans, we panic a little bit that, the human's going to be obsolete and the machines are going to take over the world. And I think people forget that AI is already here. We are already seeding our decision making. Every time we get into the car and put the sat nav on, we are seeding our decision making to a machine. It's already there. So this idea that it's coming over the horizon, it's already here. It's just maybe coming over the horizon with a different suit on. But I think we will start to accept it. It will become, because nobody ever thinks when they get into the car and put the sat nav on that they are giving all this control and they're thinking to a machine. They're just used to it.
Yeah.
So it will find a place, and I think, like I say, it will be to do the more mundane tasks that don't require emotions, feeling, and a human angle to them.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I wanted to talk a little bit, if we can, about projects and where you are at the moment in terms of consultancy projects, delivering projects for clients. So we've talked about the True Worth Collective, this network of people across tech, IT, data, cloud, and digital with yourself, and offering companies access to the network to be able to give them some advice, some guidance, some consultancy, and then potentially deliver a project. What does the life scale, I should say, of a project look like to you these days, Craig?
Well, I go back to when you first introduced me. You talked about all the things that I've done, and I have been involved in a lot of things, but I've always enjoyed working with experts who know more
And
about
I should say life cycle.
life cycle. I know what you mean. I'm a firm believer, right from the early days. When I started my agency in 2000, I was doing the front end design, I was doing the back end coding, I was trying to learn databases. I was actually teaching JavaScript, which I can't believe because I can't remember any of it now. And very quickly, I'm like, I'm not an expert at front end design, but I understand it. I'm not an expert coder. When I brought a coder in, his first comment was, "For the love of God, Craig, don't code again," because I kind of winged my way through it. But I knew enough about it to bring an expert in. And for me, with projects, it's about I over the last few years, I've tended to go into projects when they've gone wrong. People have brought me in to try and fix projects that have gone off the rails. And that's where my interest in psychology came from, because I started looking at why projects failed, why everybody sets off thinking they've got a great plan, great scope, great cost control, and why they still went wrong. And I think because we miss out an awful lot of the psychology. For me as a project manager, I like bringing in experts. I like to work with I love it when you work with a great front-end designer who'll come up with something you think, do you know what? If I lived to be a million years old, I would never come up with that. A developer overcomes a problem with a really clever use of existing technology, really knows their stuff. Digital marketing people, I mean, I'm blown away by Google Analytics at the moment. I couldn't even get my head around it. It's completely changed. So somebody that really knows that inside out. So for me, it's about building the right team of experts and bringing them together and accepting that they all know their stuff really well. So it's about building the right team. It's about understanding when we plan for projects, cognitive biases start to creep in. We're unnecessarily and unrealistically optimistic. We don't tend to want to learn from our existing problems. I mentioned before that I think we as a sector, we chase clients. And what that means is that we start off with projects that don't have the budget to ever be successful. I think we try to do too much sometimes. So with projects, particularly with the ones that have gone wrong, my first thing is to look at the scope and say, right, well, there's only a few things that can change here. If you want this to go live on the same date, we need to de-scope it. If you want it to go live on the same date with the same scope, we need more money. Simple as that. It's quite simple, but it's bringing these things together. And my personal belief with project management, and I think this is a real drop catch within digital, we don't value project management. We bring in people who to be a project manager, but then they're not a project manager, they're a project administrator, and we don't give them the ability to make decisions. As a project manager, you're a manager, you ought to be able to make decisions. But I've worked in a number of agencies where project managers are not allowed to make decisions, they're not allowed to make calls. And in a couple of cases, they don't even get to speak to the client. That's the account director's role, which I think is an awful way to do it. So we've got to value project management. But for me, it's about bringing together the experts, knitting it together, being quite tenacious as well, because sometimes it is just to keep the momentum going, to keep working towards trying to deliver something, being realistic, being honest, and being comfortable about being honest as well. And I think that's sadly only something that comes with experience is the confidence to go to a client and say, it's not on track. It's nobody's fault. It's not on track, but there's really only a few things we can do. We can either extend the deadline, we can increase the cost, we can de-scope it. So I think it's being that orchestra conductor, I think, a lot of the time, having the great people, sticking to the plan, but making realistic plans at first, and understanding that politics and psychology and people have to be taken account of. The technology is great, your methodology is really important, but if you don't factor in human relations, human emotions, politics, stakeholders, passive-aggressive behavior, all of those things, that's project management, and that is a difficult skill to nail down. And I think a lot of agencies don't value it. They bring in people that are comfortable with communication and maybe project administrators. It's a very difficult thing. IT does it. IT bring in people, they give them good salaries and they expect management out of them. But digital doesn't seem to do that, sadly.
I think that's one of the best kind of answers to what does a project life cycle look like to you, a good one, I've ever heard. And also, without blowing too much smoke up your backside, you didn't talk about technology there. Most of what you discussed was about managing people and behaviors and managing expectations and just being honest with people. And very rarely do people talk about that when they're a digital technical person. And I know you've said, I'm not really a techie, but I like to work with technical people. But I guess that's the key, isn't it? Bringing people together, buying into a bit of a vision and taking them on that journey, and making sure that along the way, you're constantly checking in to make sure things are okay. Are you okay? Are we on track? If we're not, okay, what can we do about it? It's a pretty simple thing, but I think you're right. There's maybe because in big organizations, people are a bit scared of speaking up because they're worried about their job, or they just don't want to get involved with the politics. I guess that's where the beauty of bringing in a consultancy or a collective like we've got really does benefit a client, because we're not going to sugarcoat things for them. We're going to tell them maybe some harsh truths, but we're going to tell them things that they perhaps don't want to hear but need to, and things that don't advance us but are good for the client. That's kind of where I want to be. It's got to be ethical and credible, hasn't it?
It has, and there's nothing worse than bringing somebody in as an expert and asking for their opinion, and then saying, I hear what you're saying, but I don't want to hear it. I mean, years ago, back in 2015, I started with Lookers, and 3 weeks in, they were expecting the website to be launched. I looked at the website as it was, the work as it was, went to see the agency that was delivering it, and then had to bring the person that had employed me and say, we need to call a board meeting, because I tell you now, if that website goes live in 3 weeks, it's not a little bit embarrassing. You're a PLC. This is share price changing stuff. And I was shaking going into that meeting, and I came out, and the CEO, MD, Nigel, just tapped me on the shoulder and went, thank you for that, Craig. That's what we wanted to hear. That's what we brought you in for. But it was really, it was incredibly nervous, because I had to basically go there in the first week and say, you've made a catastrophic mistake here. Please don't sign the contract. But in a way, if you my advice to business will be, if you're going to bring a contractor in, you pay them good day rates, value their opinions. That's what they're there for. There's no point bringing them in and saying, I hear what you're saying, but we're going to keep on as we are, because there's no value in that. And I think, sadly, it comes with a bit of age and experience, but it also comes with being given the right mandate by the owners of the business to do that, to be that voice that maybe people don't want to hear, particularly people that have been involved with the project from the start, because it's going to be awkward for them as to why they didn't see these things coming.
And it's an age-old problem that's always been there. When contractors come into a business, they are seen as, oh God, he's on more money than me, or he's just coming in to get paid a day rate. He's not bothered. She's not bothered about what we're trying to achieve. And there's that resentment, isn't there? So you're right. People at the top, the owners of the business, the C-suite, need to really embrace the value a contractor can bring in, and not just a developer or a support DevOps engineer. They need to value them in the same way that a project manager or an interim CIO is, or an architect coming in. They need to make sure that everybody that they're going to be working with is on board about why they're coming into the organization. But again, that just comes down to communication, doesn't it? And being really clear.
I think they have to be brought into an organization that is prepared not only to hear what they're saying, but to listen. And there's got to be that mindset with the team. I genuinely can't think of a place where I've come in where there's been, with the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis, a resentment that you're a contractor. I think actually, I look back to Lookers now, and I've kept in touch with the guys. They really valued me coming in and helping them out. And that was nice, because the relationship had completely broken down. So for me, it was a clean slate. And one of the first things I tended to do in these situations, I did it when I worked at an e-commerce business a few years ago. They brought me in because the relationship with the developer had completely broken down. So I went and sat with the people in the business, and then I went and sat with the agency, and I sat down with the agency and said, right, Chatham House rules, what goes on here stays on here. What is really knocking you about my the business I'm working on behalf of. What are they doing that's ruined this relationship? It won't go back to them, but I need to understand your frustrations with them as much as our frustrations with you. And that gives you real insight. And then I actually built a really good relationship with their project manager. And we were thick as thieves because he wanted that particular client to be more easy to deal with. And the business I was working for wanted the agency to be easy to deal with. So in a way, it was kind of project managers union. We got together and said, right, we're both trying to make the same thing, which is a more harmonious relationship. How do we do this? And that's nice when you're working with other project managers that have got an experience. But that just comes with an experience of knowing that you can't just see one person's point of view. And it is easy when you're a contractor because you are employed for the business, but you're not employed kind of by them. So you're given a little bit more leeway to dig under and see in the weeds what the real problems are.
I think we could talk all afternoon about this, Craig. And there's so much we've not covered. So I think we're going to have you back for another chat, and we can get an agenda together and really sort of maybe talk about some burning issues, because I think there's a lot there, especially in the last 10 minutes or so, where we've talked about the nuances of actually delivering a project and how psychology plays a part. And I'd love to talk to you in a bit more detail about that, actually. I think that's really important. But I really thank you today for your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Sam, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to wax lyrical about digital.
Wasn't that a company you work for?
Wax lyrical.
It sounds like a digital agency.
I remember some of the crazy names.
There was a Wax Digital, I think.
Was there?
Yeah, I think so.
I remember things like purple turtle and blue jellyfish. It seemed to be that you just find a random animal and a random colour, put them together, and that was the name of your agency. There were some fantastic names back in those days.
I'm sure if you went on ChatGPT and asked them to spit out some unusual digital media agency names or creative agency names.
I might do it. Have a look at Wayback Machine as well, because a lot of these agencies that were around 15, 20 years ago, if you look at Wayback Machine, their old websites are still backed up and archived. So you'll find some of these little gems of strange names and strange businesses.
Well, I think there's a blog there, isn't there? We used ChatGPT to come up with some new outlandish names for creative agencies.
I'll ask it and let you know.
Yeah, Craig, thank you again. Really appreciate you joining us. We'll have you back again, and take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks a lot, Sam.
See you. Bye-bye.